The wagon lurched over another rut in the dirt road, and Willa Foster gripped the wooden seat beneath her with both hands, her knuckles white as she tried to keep her balance while her latest guardian shouted at the horses. She had stopped counting how many times she had been traded between the Harland and Whitmore families over the past 4 years, but she knew this was her 11th transfer, and the number felt like a brand on her heart. The feud between the two families had started long before she was born, something about stolen cattle and a disputed water source in the mountains near Westcliff, Colorado, back in 1878. Now it was 1886, and Willa had turned 22 just 3 weeks ago, though nobody had remembered to mark the occasion. She was property now, passed back and forth like a gambling chip, whenever one family felt they had been slighted by the other, and she had learned to pack her meager belongings quickly and keep her opinions to herself. "You better be worth the trouble," Marcus Harlan growled from the driver's seat, not bothering to look at her. He was a thick-necked man with perpetually red cheeks and breath that smelled like whiskey, even this early in the morning. "The Whitmores took our best breeding mare last month, so we demanded you back. My wife says you are useless in the kitchen, but at least you can mend clothes." Willa said nothing because there was nothing to say. She had learned that lesson after her first transfer when she was 18, and foolish enough to think someone might listen to her protests. Her parents had died in a house fire when she was 17, leaving her with no family and substantial debt to both the Harlans and the Whitmores, who had provided supplies to her father's failing ranch before it burned. The two families had decided she would work off the debt by serving both households, but their ancient hatred for each other meant she became a pawn in their endless battle for dominance. The mountain peaks rose around them as they traveled west from Westcliff, their snow-capped summits gleaming in the September morning light. The aspens were turning gold on the hillsides, and under different circumstances, Willa might have found the scenery beautiful. Instead, she felt like she was being transported to another prison, just with different walls and different jailers. They reached the Harlan Ranch by midday, a sprawling property with a main house, 2 barns, and several outbuildings scattered across a valley between 2 mountain ridges. Martha Harlan came out to meet them, her thin face pinched with displeasure as she looked Willa up and down. "She looks thinner than last time," Martha said to her husband as though Willa were livestock being evaluated. "The Whitmores probably did not feed her properly." "Well, put her in the back room and tell her to start on the mending pile. I have 3 months of torn shirts waiting." Willa climbed down from the wagon and followed Martha into the house, her small canvas bag containing her only possessions clutched against her chest. The back room was barely larger than a closet, with a narrow bed and a single window that looked out at the barn. She had stayed in this room 5 times before, and each time it felt smaller. She was setting down her bag when she heard shouting from outside. Through the window, she could see riders approaching from the east, at least 6 men on horseback, and she recognized the Whitmore family crest on their saddle blankets even from this distance. Her stomach dropped. It had been less than 2 hours since she had been transferred, and already the other family was coming to make trouble. "That is our property you took," one of the Whitmore men shouted as he reined his horse to a stop in front of the house. Willa recognized him as Gerald Whitmore, the eldest son, a man with a quick temper and faster fists. "That mare was payment for the fence your cattle destroyed last spring. You had no right to demand the girl back." Marcus Harlan came out of the house with a rifle in his hands, though he did not raise it yet. "The girl was ours first, and you kept her for 6 months longer than agreed. The mare was compensation for that theft. Now get off my property before I have you thrown off." The argument escalated quickly, with both sides bringing up grievances that stretched back decades. Willa listened from her room, her heart pounding, as she realized this confrontation was about to turn violent. She had seen it happen before, these standoffs that started with words and ended with bloodshed. Twice in the past 4 years, men had died because of this feud, and she carried the guilt of those deaths like stones in her chest. She was about to step away from the window when a new figure appeared on the scene, riding down from the mountain pass to the north on a massive gray horse. Even from a distance, Willa could tell this man was different from the ranch hands, and family members gathered in the yard. He sat tall in his saddle, his shoulders broad and powerful, and his dark hair fell past his collar in waves that caught the sunlight. He wore buckskin trousers and a heavy coat that looked like it was made from bear fur, and across his saddle, She could see a long rifle and what looked like several traps hanging from leather straps. The man rode directly into the middle of the confrontation, and his presence was so commanding that both groups of men fell silent and turned to stare at him. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with authority, and Willa found herself pressed against the window, unable to look away. "This ends today," the man said, and his voice carried across the yard like thunder rolling down from the peaks. "I have watched you two families tear each other apart for 8 years, and I am done watching. Who the hell are you?" Gerald Whitmore demanded, his hand moving toward the pistol at his hip. "Clayton York," the man said simply. "I trap these mountains, and I trade with Westcliff twice a month. I knew both your fathers before this feud started, and I know exactly how it began. Over a lie." The gathered men exchanged glances, confusion mixing with their anger. Marcus Harlan lowered his rifle slightly. "What are you talking about?" Clayton turned to face him, and Willa could see his profile clearly now. His face was weathered from years in the mountains, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble and eyes that were the color of storm clouds. He was powerfully built, with thick arms and a chest that strained against his shirt, and he moved with the confidence of someone who had faced down bears and survived winters in the high country. "I am talking about Jacob Finch," Clayton said, "the drifter who worked for both your families back in '78. He is the one who stole the Harlan cattle and drove them onto Whitmore land, then told Marcus that Gerald was responsible. He is the one who poisoned the water source and made it look like the Whitmores had done it to drive the Harlans out. He told me all of this himself 2 years ago when I found him dying from exposure in a cave 20 miles north of here. He wanted someone to know the truth before he died." The silence that followed was profound. Willa watched as the men in the yard looked at each other, decades of hatred crumbling in the face of this revelation. She saw Martha Harlan appear in the doorway behind her husband, her face pale. "Why should we believe you?" Gerald finally asked, but his voice lacked conviction. "Because I gain nothing from lying," Clayton said. "I live alone in the mountains. Your feud means nothing to me, except that it has cost good people their lives and their peace. I stayed silent before, because I thought you would all come to your senses eventually. But then I heard about the girl you pass back and forth like she is a piece of property, and I decided I was done waiting for you to grow up." Martha Harlan spoke up then, her voice sharp. "The girl owes both our families a debt. She must work it off." Clayton turned his full attention to the house, and Willa felt her breath catch as his eyes seemed to find her window. "How much does she owe?" $300 to us, Marcus said, "and the same to the Whitmores. Her father borrowed heavily before he died. $600 total," Clayton said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch that clinked heavily with coins. "I have been trapping and trading for 15 years, and I have saved most of what I earned. I will pay her debt in full to both families right now, and in return you will end this feud and leave each other in peace. You will also leave the girl alone, completely." Willa felt her legs go weak. She grabbed the windowsill to keep herself upright as she watched Clayton count out coins into 2 piles on a wooden fence post. The men gathered around, checking the gold and silver pieces, weighing them in their hands. It was more money than Willa had ever seen in one place. "This is payment for the girl?" Gerald Whitmore asked slowly. "You are buying her?" "I am paying her debt," Clayton corrected, his voice hard. "She is not property to be bought. But once this debt is settled, she is free, and you will all leave her alone. If you do not agree to this, I will take back my money, ride into Westcliff, and tell everyone in town exactly how this feud started, and how 2 respected families have been terrorizing an orphaned girl for years. Your reputations will not survive that story." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Willa could see the calculation in the eyes of both Marcus Harlan and Gerald Whitmore, weighing their pride against their standing in the community. Finally, Marcus nodded. "Agreed," he said. "The debt is paid. The girl is free to go and the feud." Clayton pressed. Gerald Whitmore spat on the ground but then nodded. "If what you say about Jacob Finch is true, then we have been fighting over nothing. I am willing to let it rest if Harlan is." It took another hour of negotiation and the shaking of hands that clearly made both parties uncomfortable. But eventually, the Whitmores rode away, and Marcus Harlan turned to his house and shouted for Willa to come out. She grabbed her bag with shaking hands and walked through the house on unsteady legs, emerging into the afternoon sunlight to find Clayton York waiting beside his horse. Up close, he was even more imposing. He stood well over 6 feet tall, and his shoulders were so broad they blocked out the sun. His arms were thick with muscle from years of swinging axes and hauling traps, and his hands were scarred and calloused. But when he looked at her, his storm-gray eyes were surprisingly gentle. "You are Willa Foster?" he asked. "Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am Clayton York. I just paid your debt, which means you are free. You can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. I am heading back to my cabin in the mountains. You are welcome to come with me until you figure out your next step, or I can take you into Westcliff and help you find work and a place to stay. The choice is yours." Willa stared at him, unable to process what was happening. Freedom was not a concept she had allowed herself to think about for 4 years. "Why did you do this?" "Because it was wrong," Clayton said simply. "What they were doing to you was wrong, and I had the means to stop it, so I did. You do not owe me anything, Willa. I want you to understand that. Whatever you decide to do now, it is your choice." She looked back at the Harland house, where Martha stood in the doorway, with her arms crossed, her expression sour. She thought about going back to Westcliff, trying to find work as a seamstress or a cook, always wondering if the Harlands or Whitmores would find a way to cause her trouble. And then she looked at Clayton York, this mountain man who had appeared like something out of a legend and shattered the chains that had bound her for so long. "I will come with you," she said. "At least for now. I need time to think, and I do not want to stay here." Clayton nodded and held out his hand to help her mount his horse. His grip was strong and steady, and he lifted her into the saddle as though she weighed nothing. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins, and Willa felt the solid warmth of his chest against her back. The horse started moving, carrying them away from the ranch and toward the mountains, and Willa did not look back. They rode for hours, climbing higher into the peaks as the afternoon faded toward evening. Clayton did not talk much, but he pointed out landmarks and told her the names of the mountains they passed. He showed her where a black bear had her den and where a golden eagle nested in the cliffs. His knowledge of the wilderness was absolute, and Willa found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. "How far is your cabin?" she finally asked. "Another hour," Clayton said. "It is remote, but it has everything we need. I built it myself 6 years ago when I decided to make this area my permanent territory. It is not fancy, but it is solid and warm." "We?" she asked, her heart suddenly pounding. "Is there someone else there?" "Just my dog," Clayton said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "His name is Kodiak, and he is probably wondering where I have been. I left 3 days ago to take some furs to Westcliff, and I usually do not stay away this long." The cabin appeared as the sun was setting, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was larger than Willa had expected, built from thick logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. A huge brown dog came bounding out to meet them, barking joyfully and jumping up to put his paws on Clayton's chest as soon as the mountain man dismounted. "Down, Kodiak," Clayton said, but he was grinning as he rubbed the dog's ears. "Yes, I missed you too. We have a guest, so mind your manners." Kodiak immediately went to investigate Willa, sniffing her boots and wagging his tail so hard his whole back end shook. She reached down cautiously to pet his head, and he licked her hand, his brown eyes warm and friendly. "He likes you," Clayton said. "That is a good sign. He usually does not trust strangers this quickly." Clayton helped her down from the horse and then led the animal to a small barn behind the cabin. Willa followed, watching as he unsaddled the gray gelding and gave him feed and water. His movements were efficient and practiced, and she could see the care he took with the animal. "What is his name?" she asked, gesturing to the horse. "Storm," Clayton said. "I found him as a colt abandoned in a canyon during a blizzard, nursed him through the winter, and he has been with me ever since. He is the most sure-footed mountain horse I have ever seen." When the horse was settled, Clayton led Willa into the cabin. The interior was surprisingly comfortable with a large stone fireplace, handmade furniture, and shelves lined with books. Furs and hides hung on the walls, and she could see a well-stocked kitchen area and a loft above that probably served as a sleeping space. "You can have the loft," Clayton said, following her gaze. "I will sleep down here by the fire. There are blankets and furs up there, so you should be warm enough. Are you hungry?" Willa realized she had not eaten since early that morning, and her stomach was growling. "Yes," Clayton nodded and moved to the kitchen area, pulling out dried meat, bread, and some vegetables that looked like he had stored them in a root cellar. He worked efficiently, building a fire in the fireplace and setting a pot of stew to cook. Willa stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, unsure what to do with herself. "You can sit," Clayton said gently. nodding toward one of the chairs near the fire. Or explore if you want. Make yourself comfortable. This is your home for as long as you need it to be. She sat, watching him move around the cabin. He was graceful despite his size, and there was something deeply calming about his presence. He did not fill the silence with empty chatter, but the quiet between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. When the stew was ready, he served her a generous portion and sat across from her with his own bowl. The food was simple but well seasoned and delicious, and Willa ate until she was fuller than she had been in months. "Thank you," she said when she finished. "For everything, the food, the shelter, but mostly for what you did today. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Clayton said firmly. "I meant what I said earlier. You do not owe me anything. I did what I did because it was right, not because I expected something in return." "But $600, Willa protested. "That is a fortune, and you gave it away for a stranger." "Money is just a tool," Clayton said, shrugging his massive shoulders. "I have no family to provide for, and I live simply. I make more than enough from my trapping to keep myself fed and supplied. That money was just sitting in a box under my floorboards, doing nothing. Now it has done something good. That is worth more to me than any amount of gold." Willa felt tears prick her eyes, the first real tears she had allowed herself in years. This man, this stranger, had shown her more kindness in one day than she had received in 4 years of servitude. "I do not understand you." "What is there to understand?" Clayton asked, his gray eyes steady on hers. "You were in trouble. I could help." "So I did. Most people would not," Willa said quietly. "Then most people are fools," Clayton replied. He stood and collected their empty bowls, taking them to a basin of water near the kitchen. "You should get some rest. I imagine today has been exhausting. Tomorrow, you can tell me what you want to do next, and I will help however I can." Willa climbed the ladder to the loft, finding it exactly as Clayton had described. There was a comfortable bed piled with furs and blankets, a small chest for storage, and a window that looked out at the mountain peaks. She changed into her nightdress and slipped under the covers, the softness and warmth almost overwhelming after so many nights on hard, thin mattresses. She could hear Clayton moving around below, the crackle of the fire, and Kodiak's snores from somewhere near the hearth. For the first time in 4 years, Willa Foster fell asleep feeling safe. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, sunlight streaming through the loft window. For a moment she was disoriented, and then the events of the previous day came flooding back. She dressed quickly and climbed down the ladder to find Clayton already up and cooking breakfast, his hair damp like he had washed at the pump outside. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder at her. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," Will admitted. "Thank you." They ate breakfast together, and then Clayton announced he needed to check his trap lines in the area. "You are welcome to come with me if you want to see more of the mountains, or you can stay here and rest. Whatever you prefer." Willa had spent 4 years trapped inside houses, cooking and cleaning and mending. The thought of being outdoors, of seeing the wilderness, was too appealing to resist. "I would like to come with you if I would not be in the way." "You would not be in the way," Clayton assured her. "But the terrain can be rough. Do you have sturdy boots?" She did not, and Clayton disappeared into a storage room, emerging with a pair of leather boots that he said had belonged to a trader who had stayed with him one winter. They were a bit too large, but with extra socks, they fit well enough. They set out with Kodiak bounding ahead of them, following a trail that wound through the pines and up into the higher elevations. Clayton moved through the wilderness like he was part of it, reading signs in the dirt and the trees that Willa could not even see. He showed her where elk had passed the night before and where a mountain lion had marked its territory. He checked 6 traps, releasing 2 that were empty and resetting them, and collecting one that held a beaver, which he dispatched quickly and humanely. "I only trap what I need," he explained as he worked, "and I use every part of the animal. The fur is for trading, but the meat feeds me and Kodiak, and I tan the hides for leather and blankets. Nothing goes to waste." Willa watched him work, fascinated by his skill and his respect for the animals. He was different from any man she had ever known. The ranchers she had served were rough and often cruel, viewing the land and animals as things to be conquered and exploited. Clayton saw himself as part of the wilderness, taking only what he needed and giving back in his own way. They stopped for lunch beside a stream, and Clayton taught her how to identify edible plants and where to look for fish. He spoke about the mountains with a reverence that made it clear this was not just where he lived, but what he loved. "Why did you come to the mountains?" Willa asked as they sat on a sun-warmed rock eating the bread and cheese Clayton had packed. "I did not fit in towns," Clayton said after a moment. "I was born in St. Louis, and my father wanted me to take over his mercantile business. But I spent all my time reading about explorers and trappers, dreaming about the wilderness. When I turned 18, I left home and headed west. I worked as a hunter for wagon trains for a few years, then started trapping on my own. I found these mountains when I was 24, and I knew I had found home." "How old are you now?" Willa asked. 30, Clayton said. "Old enough to know what I want, and young enough to still enjoy the hard work it takes to get it." They returned to the cabin in the late afternoon, and Willa insisted on helping prepare dinner. Clayton had a surprising variety of supplies in his pantry, including flour, sugar, coffee, and even some dried fruit. She made biscuits and a venison stew, and Clayton praised her cooking so genuinely that she felt herself blushing. After dinner, they sat by the fire, and Clayton asked her about her life before the feud. Willa found herself talking about her parents, about the small ranch they had tried to build, and about her dreams of becoming a teacher someday. She had loved reading and learning, and before her parents died, they had been saving money to send her to a teaching college in Denver. "You still could," Clayton said. "The money I paid to the Harlans and Whitmores was yours to earn back. You could stay here and work as my partner. I have been thinking about expanding my trapping territory, maybe setting up a trading post closer to Westcliff. I could use someone smart and capable to help me. I would pay you fair wages, and within a year or two, you would have enough saved to go to Denver if that is still what you want." Willa stared at him, surprised by the offer. "You would do that?" "I would not offer if I did not mean it," Clayton said. "But I want to be clear, Willa. I am not offering this because I pity you or because I think you owe me. I am offering because I think we could work well together, and because I think you deserve a chance to build the life you want. If you would rather I take you to Westcliff and help you find something else, I will do that too. This is your choice." Willa thought about her options. She could go to Westcliff and try to find work as a seamstress or a cook, but jobs were scarce, and she would be starting with nothing. Or she could stay here in this beautiful place with this remarkable man and build something real. The choice seemed obvious. "I would like to stay," she said, "and work with you. I want to earn my own way." Clayton smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his rugged face and made her heart skip a beat. "Then we have a partnership. I will teach you everything I know about trapping and trading, and you can teach me whatever you know. We will be equals in this." Over the following weeks, Willa settled into a routine that felt more like living than anything she had experienced since her parents died. Clayton was a patient teacher, showing her how to set traps, how to skin and tan hides, and how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals. She learned to shoot a rifle and how to defend herself against wild animals. She also took over the garden. Clayton had been neglecting coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil, and she organized his chaotic storage systems, creating an inventory of his furs and supplies. They worked side by side during the days and talked by the fire at night. Clayton was well-read despite his isolated life, and he had an impressive collection of books that he had traded for over the years. They discussed philosophy and history, and Clayton borrowed her perspective on things while sharing his own hard-won wisdom about survival and self-reliance. Willa found herself watching him when he did not notice, admiring the way his muscles flexed when he chopped wood, or the concentration on his face when he worked on tanning a hide. He was unfailingly gentle with her, never making her feel pressured or uncomfortable, but she caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read. One evening in late October, they returned to the cabin after a long day checking the far trap line to find the first snow of the season beginning to fall. Clayton built up the fire while Willa made dinner, and they ate while watching the flakes drift past the windows. "Winter comes early in the high country," Clayton said, "and it can be harsh. If you are going to stay through the winter, there are some things we need to prepare. We will need to lay in more wood, make sure we have enough supplies, and check that the barn is ready for storm. Once the deep snows come, we will be mostly confined to the area around the cabin until spring." "I am not afraid of winter," Willa said. "I want to stay." She realized as she said it that it was completely true. She did not want to leave this cabin, this mountain, or this man. Somewhere over the past 6 weeks, Clayton York had become more than just her rescuer or her business partner. He had become the person she looked forward to seeing every morning and the last face she wanted to see before sleep. He had become essential. The realization must have shown on her face because Clayton's expression shifted, becoming intense and focused. "Willa," he said carefully, "I need to tell you something, but I do not want you to feel obligated or pressured in any way. If you want me to stay silent, I will." Her heart was pounding. "Tell me." Clayton set down his plate and moved to kneel in front of her chair, his gray eyes level with hers. "I have feelings for you. They started the moment I saw you watching from that window at the Harland Ranch, looking so lost and trapped, and they have grown every single day since. You are brilliant and brave and beautiful, and I think about you every moment we are apart. But I need you to know that you do not have to return those feelings. You will always have a place here, as my partner and my friend, no matter what. I am telling you this because I am not good at hiding what I feel, and I do not want you to think I have been dishonest." Willa reached out and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm and the warmth of his skin. "Clayton, I feel the same way. I have been trying not to because I did not know if you wanted that from me, but I cannot help it. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way nobody else ever has. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you rode into that yard and demanded my freedom." Clayton's eyes widened, and then he was surging forward, his hands cupping her face as he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and hungry, filled with weeks of restrained longing, and Willa kissed him back with equal passion. His arms came around her, lifting her from the chair and holding her against his chest like she was precious and fragile, even though she could feel the controlled strength in his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clayton rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Willa Foster. I know it is fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." "I love you too," she whispered, "and I do not care if it is fast, it feels right." They spent the rest of the evening on the sofa near the fire, wrapped in each other's arms and talking about the future. Clayton wanted to marry her, he said, but only when she was ready. He wanted to build onto the cabin, creating more space so they could have a family someday. He wanted to teach their children to love the mountains as much as he did. Willa listened to his plans and added her own. She wanted to create a library in the cabin, filling the shelves with even more books. She wanted to learn to ride storms so she could explore more of the wilderness. And yes, she wanted children. But first, she wanted time with just Clayton, time to learn every part of him and to build the foundation of their life together. They were married in Westcliff on a clear November morning, with the circuit judge presiding and a few of Clayton's trading friends serving as witnesses. Willa wore a simple blue dress that Clayton had bought for her, and he wore his cleanest buckskins and a white shirt. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton kissed her in front of everyone, his joy so obvious that several people in the crowd cheered. They returned to the cabin, which Clayton now referred to as their home, and settled into married life. The winter was indeed harsh, with snow piling higher than the windows and temperatures that dropped so low the frost formed intricate patterns on the glass. But inside the cabin, wrapped in furs in each other's arms, Willa had never been warmer. Clayton was an attentive and passionate husband, treating her like she was the most precious thing in his world. He made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes and a fierce hunger that left her breathless. They learned each other's bodies and each other's needs, and Willa discovered a sensuality she had not known she possessed. During the long winter evenings, they talked about everything and nothing. Clayton told her stories of his years in the mountains, of close calls with bears and blizzards, and of the profound peace he found in the wilderness. Willa shared her dreams and fears, and Clayton listened to every word like it mattered. In early spring, when the snow began to melt and the first green shoots appeared, Willa realized she was pregnant. She told Clayton one morning as they were checking on the garden, and he dropped the tool he was holding and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "Are you happy?" she asked when he finally set her down, his hands resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Clayton said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have given me everything I did not know I needed, Willa. A partner, a wife, and now a child. I love you more than I can express." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Clayton was protective to the point of being overbearing. He insisted she rest more. He took over all the heavy work, and he spent his evenings reading books about childbirth and infant care that he had ordered from a catalog. Willa found his concern endearing, even when she had to remind him that she was pregnant, not fragile. Their son was born on a warm September evening, almost exactly a year after Clayton had first appeared at the Harland Ranch. The local midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Chen who lived near Westcliff, had come to stay with them for the last 2 weeks of the pregnancy, and she guided Willa through the labor with calm efficiency while Clayton paced outside like a caged bear. When Mrs. Chen finally opened the door and told him he could come in, Clayton burst into the room and went directly to Willa's side. She was exhausted and sweaty but smiling as she held their tiny son against her chest. "He is perfect," Clayton whispered, his large hand gently touching the baby's dark hair. "Just like his mother." They named him Clayton York, and he had Clayton's gray eyes and Willa's delicate features. Clayton was a devoted father from the first moment, handling the baby with surprising gentleness for such a large man, and getting up for the nighttime feedings without complaint. He built a cradle with his own hands and carved toys for when Connor was old enough to play. As Connor grew, the cabin filled with the sounds of his laughter and Clayton's deep voice telling stories. Willa watched her husband teach their son to walk, holding the boy's hands and encouraging every wobbly step. She watched him show Connor the names of the trees and the tracks of animals in the snow. And she fell in love with Clayton all over again every single day. 2 years after Connor was born, Willa gave birth to twin daughters, Caroline and Catherine, who had their mother's blonde hair and their father's determined spirit. The cabin was chaos for the first few months, with 2 infants demanding attention at all hours. But Clayton and Willa worked together seamlessly, supporting each other through the exhaustion. Clayton expanded the cabin as he had promised, adding 2 more rooms and a larger kitchen. He also built a schoolhouse on their property, a small building where Willa could eventually teach not just their own children, but any others in the area who wanted an education. It was her dream realized, and she cried when he showed her the completed building with desks he had made and a chalkboard he had ordered from Denver. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Connor grew into a serious boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did, following Clayton on trap lines as soon as he was old enough to keep up. The twins were wild and joyful, always getting into mischief and making their parents laugh with their antics. Willa started her school when the twins were 5, teaching not just her own children, but 6 other children from families scattered through the mountains around Westcliff. Clayton helped by transporting the children who lived too far to walk, and by teaching practical skills like tracking and wilderness survival. The school became a point of pride for the community, and Willa's reputation as an excellent teacher spread. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Clayton surprised her with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Mrs. Chen and spent a week in the city, staying in a hotel and attending theater performances and visiting bookstores. It was a wonderful adventure, but Willa found herself missing the mountains and eager to return home. "I never thought I would say this," she told Clayton as they rode the train back to Colorado Springs. "But I miss the quiet. The city is exciting, but it is not home." "Home is wherever you are," Clayton said, taking her hand and kissing her knuckles. "But I am glad you love the mountains as much as I do. I was worried when I first brought you there that you might eventually long for something more civilized." "The mountains are civilized," Willa said, "just in a different way, and I have everything I need there. You, our children, my school, and the most beautiful views in the world. What more could I want?" They returned to find their children healthy and happy, and Connor proudly showed them he had found injured and nursed back to health under Mrs. Chen's supervision. Clayton praised his son's compassion and skill, and Connor glowed under his father's approval. More years passed, and their family continued to grow. Willa gave birth to another son, Christopher, when she was 35, and he was their last baby, a sweet-natured child who seemed to inherit the best qualities of both his parents. Clayton was 43 by then, with silver threading through his dark hair, but he was still strong and vital, still hiking the mountains and running his trap lines. The feud that had once consumed the Harland and Whitmore families was now a distant memory. Both families had prospered in the years since peace had been established, and their children, who had not grown up hating each other, had even intermarried in some cases. Occasionally, Willa would encounter members of the families in Westcliff, and they would nod politely but without real warmth. She felt no bitterness toward them anymore. Her life had turned out better than she ever could have imagined, and she had Clayton to thank for that. When Connor turned 18, he announced that he wanted to become a park ranger for the newly established Forest Service. Clayton was proud of his son's choice, seeing it as an extension of the values he had tried to instill. The twins, now 16, were both preparing to attend teaching college in Denver, wanting to follow in their mother's footsteps. Christopher, at 8, was still deciding what he wanted to be, but was leaning toward becoming a veterinarian, his love of animals evident in the way he cared for every creature he encountered. Willa and Clayton sat on their porch one evening after all the children were asleep, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Clayton had his arm around her shoulders, and she was tucked against his side, her head resting on his chest. "Do you ever regret it?" Clayton asked quietly. "The life we have built here? I know it has not been easy, and you have worked so hard." "Regret it?" Willa pulled back to look at him, astonished. "Clayton, you gave me everything. You gave me freedom when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me children and a home and a purpose. How could I possibly regret any of it?" "I took you from civilization," Clayton said. "You could have been a teacher in a real town, with a proper school, and social events and everything that comes with that life." "I have a real school," Willa said firmly. "I have taught dozens of children over the years, and many of them have gone on to do remarkable things. I have a community here, even if it is small and spread out, and I have you. Clayton, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I would choose this life, and you, 1,000 times over." Clayton kissed her then, a kiss that still held the passion of their early days together, but also the depth of a decade and a half of shared life. When they pulled apart, he was smiling. "I love you, Willa York," he said. "More now than even on the day I married you. And I did not think that was possible." "I love you too," she whispered. "Forever." They sat together as the night deepened, comfortable in the silence and in each other's presence. The mountains rose around them, protective and eternal, and inside the cabin, their children slept safely. It was not the life Willa had imagined for herself when she was a girl, but it was better than anything she could have dreamed. She had been passed between families like currency, treated as property in a feud she had no part in creating. But Clayton York had ended that feud with truth and determination, and in doing so, he had freed her. More than that, he had loved her, and that love had transformed her from a victim into a partner, from a pawn into a woman who controlled her own destiny. The years continued to be kind to them. Connor excelled in his ranger work, eventually becoming the head ranger for the entire region around Westcliff. The twins became beloved teachers in Denver, though they returned home every summer to help their mother with her mountain school and to spend time with their family. Christopher attended veterinary school in Fort Collins and then returned to set up a practice in Westcliff, where he treated everything from cattle to family dogs to the occasional wild animal someone brought in. Clayton and Willa grew older together, their hair turning gray and their movements becoming a bit slower, but their love remained constant. They still hiked the mountains, though not as far or as fast as they once had. They still read together by the fire on winter evenings, and they still made love with a passion that left them both grateful for the life they had built. On their 25th anniversary, their children organized a surprise celebration at the cabin. All 4 of them came home, bringing spouses and grandchildren, and the house that had once felt spacious suddenly seemed wonderfully crowded. There was laughter and storytelling, good food and music, and Clayton stood in the middle of it all, with Willa at his side, his eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "Look what we made," he whispered to her as they watched their grandchildren play on the porch. "Look at this family." "We did well," Willa agreed, her own eyes damp. "We did very well." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Willa and Clayton walked out to their favorite spot, a clearing above the cabin where they could see the entire valley spread out below them. The moon was full, turning the landscape silver, and the air was sweet with the scent of pine. "When I rode down to that ranch 25 years ago," Clayton said, "I had no idea my life was about to change. I thought I was just stopping a feud, doing the right thing. I did not know I was about to meet the woman who would become my everything." "I saw you from the window," Willa said, "and I thought you looked like a hero from a story. You were so strong and so confident, and you made me feel safe even before I knew your name. And then you did something no one else would have done. You paid for my freedom and asked for nothing in return." "I got everything in return," Clayton said. "I got you." They stood together in the moonlight, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. The feud that had once threatened to destroy Willa's life was now just a footnote in their history, a dark chapter that had led to the brightest future. As they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, Willa thought about the girl she had been at 22, broken and hopeless, passed between families who saw her only as a tool for their hatred. She thought about how close she had come to losing herself completely in that darkness. And then she thought about the woman she had become, strong and loved and fulfilled, with a family that adored her and a purpose that gave her life meaning. Clayton York had saved her, but more than that, he had shown her that she was worth saving. He had looked at her not as a debt to be collected or a burden to be managed, but as a person worthy of love and respect. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift possible, the chance to become herself. They reached the cabin and went inside, banking the fire and climbing the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for 25 years. As they settled into bed, Clayton pulled Willa close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Clayton asked, his hand stroking her hair. "For everything. For seeing me when no one else did. For loving me when I did not know how to love myself. For building this life with me. For being exactly who you are." "You never have to thank me for loving you," Clayton said softly. "Loving you has been the easiest and best thing I have ever done. You are my heart, Willa. You always will be." She fell asleep in his arms, safe and warm and completely at peace. Outside, the mountains stood watch over the cabin and the family within, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The wilderness that had once seemed so vast and lonely had become home, and the man who had once been a stranger had become her everything. The feud was over. The past was settled, and the future stretched ahead of them, bright with promise and full of love. Willa Foster York had everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dreamed possible. She had freedom, she had purpose, and most of all, she had Clayton, and that was more than enough. That was everything.